I can still remember sitting in the back seat of my dad's car while Dad was driving, and my brother and I began fussing. Now, this didn't happen once or twice. This was a normal brotherly thing. And my dad, we used to call the game, as we grew up, make Dad the goat, because he had to choose one or the other, and whichever way he went, he was going to lose. And whoever lost, that's not fair. Life's not fair. I can still hear my father's voice. So much so that I imitated him as I was raising my children. And they learned life's not fair. And the truth of the matter is, life's not fair. And we go on with it, and we live with it. But sometimes it hits home. Last week, I had to announce that two of our brothers and sisters have basically been given the fact that they're going to die. Elise is the daughter of a preacher, a granddaughter of an elder, the wife of a young man that is preaching. She's the mother of 2 boys. And that picture was just taken a week or 2 ago. And she looks healthy, but she was told she has somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. It may be a little more than that. But the nature and the history of what she's gone through, it probably won't be. And I'm going to tell you, life's not fair. And then this is a preacher. One of the most brilliant preachers, great Bible scholar, a great orator. What makes him so great is he can preach 20-minute lessons that are worth listening to. And when he was preaching this last week or 2 weeks ago, he had some allergies and a problem. And one of his brothers had to get up, using a Kleenex, had to wipe his nose and his upper lip because he has ALS. And it's developed to the point that he can't use his arms, so he couldn't wipe his nose. And he's in a wheelchair because he can't use his legs. But you all see what he's doing? He's preaching. His voice isn't as strong as it used to be. But ALS is a death warrant. It always increases the problems and never backs up, and there is no treatment for it whatsoever. So, life's not fair. These are 2 servants of God that will not live to see old age. But until the time that they die, they have decided they will serve the Lord. How in the world did we get here? Because y'all remember in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And when God began creating things, after everything, He says, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good. And I turned to the news this morning and it's not good. It's awful. I heard the news of my two friends and it's not good in one sense. It's awful. And so we live in a world that has drastically changed from what God said is good to that which is now oftentimes bad, evil, corrupt, hard, unfair. Romans chapter 5, verse 12, the Apostle Paul summarized what happened. By one man, sin entered the world, and death by sin. And at that juncture, the whole story of Genesis changed from that which was good and living in the presence of God to that which was bad, living outside of the presence of God, and death entered the world. And so the first story you read after that is Cain and Abel. And Cain killed his brother. And since that time, we have been slaughtering one another. And we have had wars and fights. And the daily death rate is marked in every newspaper. And what happens is, it's sin. And it's entered the world. And we live in a world that is corrupt and evil. And there's lots of people that are corrupt and evil. And then I stop and think, I'm not innocent. I've added my corruption and my sin. I'm going to tell you, y'all can be thankful for this because I am. I never killed anybody. I've never intentionally robbed anybody. There are lots of things I've never done, but there's a whole bunch that I've done. And whether little or whether big, sin has entered the world and we have sinned and we have corrupted this world, and thus this is our world. But it wasn't what God created it for. And so the problem comes is if you're not very careful, you can become really discouraged at this point. And you can be really negative at this point. And if all you ever do is turn on the news, you're not going to hear very much good news. Now, there's one or two news stations, news programs, that after they spent 25 minutes telling you of all of the corruption and evil and death and destruction, they like to give you one little feel-good story at the end. But y'all are a feel-good story for me. I come here and we get to talk about what we did this week. And it's not death and destruction and misery. It's that which we've done in glorifying God and living as a Christian. And there's some things that are hard. But it's not all bad. In fact, there's lots of good. It's just that good doesn't sell and good doesn't get the news and good's not going to be, but it's all around us. And so I'm not discouraged. I was talking with a bunch of preachers recently about how the younger men are not going into preaching. And while we were all commiserating about that, another man said, let me tell you about a few though. And he started naming some of the young men and what they've been doing and how they're excited about this. Do y'all remember how excited Brandon was? Why would anybody be excited about preaching? That's because This is the good news. Turn the TV set off and go convert your neighbor. It's good news. And thus what we have is we have to live in this dichotomy. And life is not fair, but it's not all bad. And some of it is good. And so we are taught. This is how we respond to the evil in this world. We love God with all of our heart and soul and might and strength. I learn about God and His character, and He's good. Always. Even when life is not fair, God is fair. God is right. God is holy. And that's never going to change. Don't you want to go there? This is not my home. I always remember Brother Robert Turner. He was preparing for his funeral for him and his wife. And so he went down and he talked to the mortician, whoever was selling the plots, and looking out this big bay window. Here was this big oak tree up on this hill, and the salesperson, that's what they are, he said, I have the perfect plot. It's right up there underneath that tree. It's a great place to spend eternity. And Brother Turner looked at him and said, oh, you got the wrong idea. I don't plan on spending eternity there. This is just a short-term lease. And do you take bicycles as a trade-in? And you know, that's absolutely true. And every time I go to a funeral, I remember Brother Turner. That this is not the end of the story. We are to love God with all of our heart and mind and soul and strength, because that's where I want to live. I want to live in His presence. I want to be there. And then that means that as I begin looking at this and I'm loving God, I do turn on the news and there is evil. Y'all know that? I don't have to give you illustrations. I told Sharon this was a hard lesson because the first thing I started to do was I started listing biblical illustrations of the evil. And I thought, y'all don't need that. Y'all done your own. We've seen, we've experienced. But I want to experience God and the presence of God, and that for eternity. And thus, you look for the helpers. In every story, there are the helpers, and there are those that are good. You know, I wrecked my bicycle and I wrecked my hip and it's trying to heal, and a friend of mine sent me a story. He said, I think you need to read this. And I read that, and this guy was riding his bicycle and he pulled out into an intersection and a car hit him doing 65 miles an hour. Now you talk about damage. And it was his hip and his ribs and his leg and his arm. And he was. I thought, I didn't need to read that. Well, the good part was he's rehabbing. In fact, what his job was when he was out riding his bike was he ran a rehab center for cyclists. And so he had all of this stuff. And he is. And so am I. And so the bad is there, but the good is there. And so as you look at every story, there is this. And so how do I go ahead and live? Now, Peter is one of the most interesting books in the New Testament because that's the one I'm reading now. Every book is different. And Peter was towards the end of his life, and persecution was beginning to pick up. And so this was not our story. We're not living in persecution. We're not living in a time where we're likely to be arrested in the middle of the night and put to death and our family doesn't know what happened to us. That is happening in other parts of the world, but that's not our story. And yet, when we read Peter, What we're reading about is how are people that are suffering supposed to live. And then I put that in my life. And you can put it in yours. And the first thing that I'm going to tell you is, we've got it pretty easy. We have lived in an easy time. We have lived in a country that for us, now it's not been easy for everybody that lives here, by the way. But regardless of how difficult the situation is, Peter says, here's how you live. And so when you read 1 Peter, he's really telling you how to live. And when you get down in the dumps, when you get grumpy about life and you hear your dad's voice in your head telling you life's not fair, here's what Peter says we're supposed to do. Number one, remember where we're going. We know the end of the story. The end of the story is living with God again. Peter said, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 10, after you've suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, who called you unto His eternal glory in Christ, will Himself perfect, confirm, and strengthen, and establish you. To Him be dominion forever and ever. Amen. How many of you have read Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3? And it talks about the life that Adam and Eve had in the garden. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know what that life was really like. I've tried to picture that. No death, no sickness, no sorrow, no squabbles, no problems, no living with God. Now, the life that I see around me now, it's not heaven. It's not God. It's not the presence of God. So what happens is Peter says, remember who you are and where you're going. And this life may require a little bit of suffering. When I was in college, some of the best advice I got, there's some classes that were just awful. There's some teachers that were not good teachers. And so you signed up for this because you can't graduate until you take this class. And this is the only teacher that teaches it. And they are awful. And somebody said, you can put up with that for 1 quarter. And when you're done taking that for 1 quarter, and you're out here and you got a job and you got married and you got your kid, you're not going to think about that class. And guess what I'm doing this morning? But I'm thinking, that wasn't no problem. That was a blip on the radar screen. That was just a little bitty bump in the road of life. In fact, I look back on it and it wasn't a bump. So, as we go through life, this is what Peter said. Remember where we're going. And when we get to the presence of God, I don't know what you're going to be like, but it's going to be perfect, strengthened, complete. You're going to be strengthened and established and confirmed as the image of God. I can't wait to see that. Ken, I want to see that on you. That's not to say I don't like what I see now. It's just that it's coming. And so we go through life. Peter said again, or Paul said in Colossians chapter 3, you've been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above. Even when those little blips come in your life, just keep seeking things above. And then Peter added, for chapter 4, verse 19, trust in your Creator doing right. Therefore, those who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their soul to a faithful Creator. I don't understand how God works all that He works and why He allows certain things to happen. I don't know why my friends have to go through what they're having to go through. I don't understand a lot of what's going on. But you know what? I trust God. This is going to work. This is going to work for them. In fact, an interesting thing, I got an email from Elise. She scheduled a party in which she invites everybody to come so she can see them again. She's not sitting in a corner commiserating. She's taking time to do things with her boys. She's taking time to do with her friends. She is living this life to the fullest that she can do. God is fair. And when we get there, all of the problems that I had to go through will seem as nothing, said Paul, because we entrust God. But if we trust God, the second part of what he said was, I'm going to trust God by doing what's good. The world's a mess, but I can do good. My neighborhood may be a mess, but I can do good. The thank you for not saying this is true, but some congregations are a mess. But if you were part of that, you could go about doing good. You could do good to those that are doing evil to you. You could do good. That's the choice we make. And Peter said that's the choice we ought to make. And we trust God to sort that out in the end. Chapter 5. As you're going through the problems of life, you need simply to humble yourself. How many of you have had a problem in your life and sat down in the corner and said, why me? How many of you had a good friend that walked up and said, why not? That's an interesting question. And the answer is, I don't know why or why not. I just know that's it. So what are you going to do about it? How are you going to respond? And he says, humble yourself. You're not above this. And you're not different from everybody else. And under the mighty hand of God, He may exalt you at the proper time. But while you're going through that, one of the greatest privileges we have is cast your cares upon Him. Does that guarantee that He's going to solve your problem? No, but He's going to strengthen you and be with you through the experience. For some people, that doesn't sound like much. But I'm going to tell you, for other people that are going through the valley of the shadow of death, death is there and it's looming and it's shadow and they're down here and that. But they're not discouraged and they're not afraid. We have Jesus who's gone before, and we have the promise of what God has promised us. And so we cast our cares upon God. And one of the great statements follows that. He cares for us. One of the mistakes we make when we begin having problems is we ask the question, why me? And then we answer it because God doesn't care. And first of all, why not you? And second of all, He does care. And so learn to pray. You know, one of the times we learn to pray the most and the most fervently and the most exactly and correctly is when we're going through problems. So we learn to trust God, because I can't solve this. I learn to trust God because the problem is bigger than me and my friends, but it's not bigger than God. So Peter said, as you go through the struggles of temptation, remember to pray. Cast your cares upon God. And the temptation to do evil, y'all know where that came from? And sometimes we want to pass that off on God. And sometimes we want to excuse ourselves by saying, I couldn't help it. Or in the infamous words of Flip Wilson, the devil made me do it. And the answer is, no, he didn't. All he could do is put the temptation in front of you, and you chose to do that. And what Peter says is, you're going to be tempted. You're going to have those problems, but resist the devil. Learn to say no. Learn to say no to yourself on that. Resist the devil. And the way you do that is you have to be firm in your faith. You don't have to know everything, but you got to trust God. You don't have to understand what's going on, but you can trust God. Because it will, in the end, work out to the glory of God and your benefit. So firm in our faith, we do that. So I want to go back to that first chart. God created it good, and we messed it all up. Well, we didn't mess it all up. And so we live in this world, but what's coming is a new heaven and a new earth. And there's lots of discussions on this. I'm just going to do that. Peter said in the second book, the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. The heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. And since all of these things are be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat. Now here's the debate that Bible students and preachers and scholars have gotten into. These words can mean not in the sense of annihilation, completely gone, but simply a renovation. I was watching a renovation show the other day. And honestly, 2 sticks of dynamite and rebuild brand new. But zoning laws didn't allow that, so they had to gut the place, rebuild the walls, rebuild all of the ceiling. They ended up in the inside having to redo the foundation and the floors. And when they got done, was it the same old house? Well, yeah. No. When God gets done with the heavens and the earth, whether it is a complete renovation or whether it is an annihilation and a creation from scratch, I want to be there. I don't care which it is. I want to be there. I want to see and live in the new heaven and the new earth, because in the new heaven and the new earth, it's not messed up. And there is no death. And there is no suffering. There is no sorrow. That's where we're headed. Are y'all glad to be on the bus? The sad part is, I'm not going there immediately. I have work to do. I have family. I have friends. I have preaching. I have teaching. But I want to go there. I want to see God and to live in His presence. So according to His promise, we are looking for a new heaven and a new earth wherein dwells righteousness. So I can put up with a blip in the road. I can put up with whatever little thing comes along. I can put up with you, with life, with problems, because I'm going to heaven. That's the goal. And He's told me how to get there. And He's told me that there's forgiveness, and He's told me there is mercy along the way, and I'm going to serve Him and do what is right. And I'm going to drag you along with me. Or maybe I'm going to grab your coattail and let you drag me. But the great thing, can you imagine what it's going to be when all of our little bunch right here stands there and God has said, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Are you going to turn and hug me? Are we going to be glad together? Can you imagine what that's going to be like? So don't mess it up now. Angry words. No, 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 no. Love one another, and we'll love God, and we will spend eternity there. So this world's a mess. Life's not fair. But heaven is. The way you go there is through Jesus. Jesus said, "He that believes in me and is baptized shall be saved." And so we offer this invitation. If for nothing else, I want to remind you that invitation is there. Whosoever believes. That invitation is for your neighbor. Hold it forth. Live according to it. And if you've stumbled along the way and you need encouragement, that's what we're here for. And we can pray with you and we can pray for you. And we will encourage you and do what we can, because we want to all make it together. And we want you to go with us. If you're willing to do that, we invite you to come as together we stand and sing.